For Jasmine Crockett, the invitation to her high school's 40th anniversary had sat unopened for weeks, a silent reminder of a past she'd consciously left behind. Over 2 decades had passed since she last walked the halls of Clara Barton High in Shreveport, Louisiana. Life in Dallas as a successful attorney was demanding, filled with court cases, hearings, and interviews that always seemed more urgent than a nostalgic trip down memory lane. However, the truth was, Shreveport held more than just sweet memories. It also held sharp ones, echoes of a childhood marked by struggle and the quiet resilience that had shaped her. She kept telling herself she was too busy, too important for such distractions. Yet, on a quiet Friday afternoon in September, a persistent tug at her conscience finally won. She turned the ignition, embarking on a 4-hour drive back to the place she once called home, unknowingly setting in motion a series of events that would spark a nationwide conversation, all because of an 80-year-old janitor who once helped feed her and was still pushing a mop. She kept telling herself she was too busy, caught up in court cases, hearings, and interviews. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was Shreveport held too many memories, some sweet, some sharp. Nevertheless, on a quiet Friday afternoon in September, she finally turned the ignition and started the 4-hour drive back to the place she once called home. The town hadn't changed much. The same faded gas station sat at the corner of Stoner Avenue. The laundromat where her mama used to drop off clothes still had the same hand-painted sign. She even passed the church where she first learned to use her voice for something bigger than herself. However, when she pulled into the cracked parking lot of Clara Barton High, the weight hit her harder than expected. She sat in her car for a minute, just watching. Kids in oversized backpacks sprinted toward the yellow buses. A group of boys were shooting hoops on the far end of the court, shouting over each other. Jasmine could see herself in them, in their energy, in their hunger. Back when all she had were secondhand books, a stubborn streak, and dreams nobody around her understood. She stepped out of the car, slowly, her heels clicking against the pavement. The breeze was warm, but her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the front doors. Inside, not much had changed. Same beige walls, same squeaky tiles, same bulletin board cluttered with faded posters and hand-drawn flyers. She wandered through the halls like a ghost, peeking into classrooms, remembering faces that had long since disappeared. She paused at room 212, the old AP English class. Miss Franks used to say Jasmine's essays were like tiny court arguments. She smiled at the memory. Then she heard it, a mop sliding against linoleum. That steady rhythm followed by the faint clink of a bucket being pulled behind. Jasmine turned the corner and stopped. There he was, Mr. Leonard Traylor, 80 years old now, according to the last article she read, but still in his worn navy overalls, moving slowly but deliberately down the hall. His hair was thinner, his back a little stooped, but his presence was unmistakable. He hadn't seen her yet. For a second, Jasmine hesitated. What do you say after 22 years? But then, as if he'd felt her watching, he looked up, and that smile broke across his face like sunlight. Well, I'll be, he said. Jasmine Crockett. Still got that same fire in your walk. Jasmine laughed, caught somewhere between nostalgia and disbelief. Mr. Traylor, you remember me? He chuckled, wiping his hands on a rag. Of course I do. You used to correct the teachers. Knew you were headed somewhere. They talked for a few minutes, small stuff at first. What she been doing? How she left for Howard, then law school. How her mama passed a few years back. How she never came back much. But today felt right. I never thought I'd see you still working here, she said finally, her voice softer now. Not at your age. Mr. Traylor leaned on his mop. There was a pause. Yeah, well, he said, life don't always line up the way you plan. You just keep moving. Keep showing up. Jasmine wanted to ask more, but a bell rang and students began pouring into the hallway. She glanced around. So many young faces rushing past, barely noticing the man, still pushing a mop after all these years. Something pulled at her chest. He'd been invisible to them, the same way he'd once been invisible to so many adults when she was a student here. But not to her, not back then, and definitely not now. However, something about that moment stayed with her longer than she expected. Jasmine found herself sitting on the low brick wall outside the cafeteria, watching the sun slip behind the school's roofline. Mr. Trailer had followed her out after his shift ended, carrying a thermos and 2 paper cups in a brown paper bag. "I figured you'd still like tea," he said, pouring without waiting for an answer. "You used to sneak some of your locker back in the day when you looked too tired." She smiled, shaking her head. "That was you? I thought I had a secret admirer." He laughed, the kind that came from deep in his chest. "Nah, just an old man who didn't like seeing good kids burn out before the world even gave them a chance." They sat in silence for a few moments, sipping. The tea was lukewarm, but Jasmine didn't care. She glanced at his hands, rough, calloused, the kind of hands that had done honest work for decades. "You ever think about retiring?" she asked, not looking at him. "All the time," he said. "But thinking and doing are 2 different things." She turned toward him. "You shouldn't still be working, Mr. Trailer." He nodded slowly. "I know." And then he said something she hadn't expected. "Josie, my wife, she got sick a long time ago. One of those illnesses that don't stop charging you just because you stop working. Insurance didn't cover much. Had to dip into the retirement fund, then the savings, then the second job, and now this." His voice was steady, but his eyes gave him away. There was pain there, deep and familiar. Not self-pity, just the kind that settles in when you've carried too much for too long. "She passed 3 years ago," he added almost as an afterthought. "I'm so sorry," Jasmine said, her throat tightening. "She used to say I'd die pushing this mop." He chuckled, but there wasn't humor in it. "Guess she was half right." Jasmine shook her head. "That's not right. You gave everything to this place, to these kids." He gave her a look, gentle but firm. "That's just what grown folks do, baby. We give. We don't wait for thank yous. We just hope it helps someone." Jasmine looked away, blinking fast. He reached into his bag and pulled out a faded photograph. It was from her senior year, a hallway full of students. And in the corner, there she was sitting on the floor with her back against the lockers, books in her lap. Mr. Trailer was in the background, sweeping. "I kept this one," he said, "because you were different. You saw people even when you didn't know what to do with what you saw." Her eyes stayed on the picture. "I never told you," she whispered, "but I saw you give Marcus Bailey a lunch ticket the day his mom lost her job. I saw you clean up that mess after Kiera threw up in class so no one would laugh at her. You didn't think we noticed, but we did." He looked at her for a moment, then nodded once slowly. "I'm glad somebody did." A group of kids passed them, laughing loudly. None of them glanced their way. Mr. Trailer finished his tea and stood. "I gotta get home. Old bones need rest." Jasmine stood with him. "You need anything before you go?" "I can." He raised a hand. "I'm all right, Jasmine. Always been, but thank you." She watched him walk to his truck. It was an old Dodge with patches of rust along the doors. He moved slowly, but with purpose. He waved once before driving off. Jasmine stood there long after the tail lights disappeared. Her tea had gone cold, but her mind was racing. Still, what she couldn't shake, what kept echoing louder than anything, was how someone like him could give so much and still carry so little in return. That night, Jasmine couldn't sleep. She sat in the guest room at her cousin's place, staring at the ceiling fan as it spun slowly overhead. Her laptop sat open next to her, inbox full of client emails, court briefs, political commentary she was supposed to respond to. But none of it mattered right now. All she could see was Mr. Trailer's face and the way no one saw him anymore. She thought back to those years in high school, times when Mr. Trailer was the only adult who felt like he saw her, not as a bright black girl with potential, not as a number or a promise, but as a human being. Jasmine didn't have the language for it back then, but now as an attorney, as someone who fought for people like him, she knew exactly what that was: respect. And it had come in moments so quiet they could have been missed. For instance, that winter during senior year, when Jasmine's mom had to work double shifts at the hospital and the heater at home went out. She remembered sitting on the stairs before first period, her fingers stiff with cold. Mr. Trailer had walked by, said nothing at first, but 10 minutes later, he came back with a heater from the staff supply closet, set it next to her, and kept walking. Nobody else even noticed. Similarly, the time she almost missed her SATs because the school lost her registration, Mr. Trailer who wasn't even supposed to be in the office, overheard the secretary brushing her off. The next morning, the form was fixed. He never said how. These were the memories that stuck. Not the prom, not graduation, not even the scholarship award. It was the quiet dignity of someone who made space for kids who were just trying to survive the chaos of adolescence. Jasmine sat up, walked to the window, and looked out across the dark neighborhood. She remembered something else, too, something she'd buried. There had been a day when she'd wanted to quit school. Everything felt like it was closing in. Her mom was sick, rent was behind, and a teacher accused her of cheating on a test. She hadn't, but her word wasn't enough. She had gone to the bathroom and cried quietly in a stall for 20 minutes. When she came out, Mr. Trailer was mopping the hallway. He didn't say anything right away, just kept mopping. Then, without looking at her, he said, "Some people will try to count you out because they're scared of what happens if you get counted in." She never forgot that. That single sentence carried her through college, through law school, through every courtroom she'd walked into since. He didn't quote books. He didn't make speeches, but he gave people something else, belief. Now she realized he might have been the first adult who ever truly believed in her. And now he was still working, still giving, still showing up for kids who probably didn't even know his name. Jasmine closed her laptop and paced the room. Her heart felt heavy, but it wasn't just sadness. It was guilt, gratitude, and something else she hadn't felt in a long time, urgency. She sat back down and started typing into a search bar. Average retirement age janitors, Louisiana, then medical debt among senior citizens, then how to start a community trust. Each result only made the knot in her stomach tighter. This wasn't about charity. It wasn't about being a savior. It was about justice, about making sure that people like Mr. Trailer weren't forgotten just because their work didn't come with a title or an office. Jasmine stared at the screen a moment longer, then opened a new document. She started typing something raw, personal, not for court, not for press. This was something different, but she knew whatever she wrote, whatever she planned, it would have to begin with the truth. Mr. Trailer had already changed her life. Now it was her turn. Jasmine woke up early the next morning, not from an alarm, but from something tugging at her chest. She got dressed quickly, wearing jeans, sneakers, and an old blazer that still carried the scent of dry-cleaned ambition. She skipped breakfast, grabbed her keys, and drove back to the school. This time, she didn't wander the halls or linger in nostalgia. She walked straight to the janitor's storage room at the far end of the East Wing, the same one Mr. Trailer had kept tidy for decades. The door was cracked open. He was inside, seated on a small wooden stool, patching a torn section of mop head with fishing line. A tiny radio buzzed softly beside him, some old gospel tune floating through the air. "Mr. Trailer," Jasmine said gently. He looked up, not surprised. "You came back." "I needed to," she replied. "Can we talk?" He set down the mop head and stood up, wiping his hands on a red rag. "Sure, baby. What's on your mind?" She hesitated. "I know what you told me yesterday about your wife, about the money, but I don't think you told me everything." He tilted his head. "What else you need to know?" "The school. Do they know you're still working this much, that you don't get benefits?" He sighed and sat back down. "They know, some of them, but it's easier to look past it. I work part-time now. Technically, no health plan, no retirement. Just enough hours to cover my groceries and the electric bill. I was supposed to quit last year, but what?" Jasmine asked, sitting across from him on an overturned milk crate. He looked at her, eyes soft. "I think if I stop coming here, I'll disappear." She blinked. "I ain't got no kids. My wife's gone. Most of the folks I knew are either dead or can't remember my name. The school, these halls, they're the only place I still matter." Jasmine leaned forward. "You matter to me. I appreciate that," he said, "but I'm not saying it for pity. I mean it. When I'm here, I feel like I'm still doing something that counts." He wasn't angry. He wasn't bitter. That was what made it hurt more. He had accepted a kind of quiet fading most people would fight tooth and nail to avoid. She took a deep breath. "You shouldn't have to work just to be seen, Mr. Trailer. You should be able to rest, to breathe, to enjoy your life." He gave a small shrug. "Rest is a luxury in this world. Some of us just don't get around to it." They sat in silence again. The gospel tune on the radio changed. A voice sang about climbing mountains. Jasmine stared at the tools on his wall. Labels handwritten in permanent marker, rags folded with care, brooms hanging like relics. Everything had its place. Everything but him. "Let me help you," she said quietly. "You already are," he replied. "No," she insisted. "Not with words, with action." He smiled again. That same smile she remembered from high school. The one that said, "I've seen the worst, and I still believe in the good." "You always had a fire in you, Jasmine. Go ahead and use it." She stood, emotion thick in her throat. "I'm serious. I'll be in touch." "I know," he said. "You always meant what you said." As she left the room, she caught one last glimpse of him, sitting in the quiet, tying up a frayed end of rope with careful hands. It wasn't just his job. It was who he was. But Jasmine wasn't about to let him carry that alone anymore. To do that, she'd have to go back to the city. Not just to her office, but to her platform, her network, and every bit of leverage she'd earned along the way. Back in Dallas, Jasmine sat at her desk, staring out the window of her corner office. The skyline stretched out in front of her. Glass towers, steady traffic, the sound of a city that never paused. But her mind wasn't here. It was still in that storage room in Shreveport with the smell of old bleach and the sound of gospel floating on a dusty radio. She tapped her fingers against her keyboard, restless. Her legal team had just wrapped a major settlement for a housing discrimination case. The press wanted quotes. A podcast was asking for an interview. None of it could touch her right now. She minimized the tabs on her screen and opened a new one. GoFundMe. She stared at the blank template for a moment, then started typing. Title: Help Mr. Trailer Retire with Dignity. Story: Leonard Trailer is 80 years old and still works full-time as a janitor at Clara Barton High in Shreveport, Louisiana. He's been there for over 5 decades. I was one of the students he quietly supported when I had nothing but a backpack full of dreams and not enough lunch tickets. He never asked for credit. He never stopped showing up. Now it's time we show up for him. She hesitated for a second, then added, "This isn't charity. This is recognition. For a man who gave his life to others with no expectation of anything in return." She uploaded the old photo he'd shown her, the one where she sat against the lockers and he was in the background, broom in hand. It hit harder than she expected. Then she hit publish. At first, nothing happened. A few shares from close friends, a handful of small donations. Jasmine picked up her phone and called her college roommate, now a journalist at a mid-sized outlet in Austin. "You still looking for a story that won't depress people?" The article went up the next morning. Then someone shared it on Twitter. Then another. Then a local TV station in Shreveport called for an interview. Jasmine kept it short and direct. "This is about Mr. Trailer. It's not about me. It's about the kind of man we forget to see." Within 72 hours, the fundraiser hit $40,000. Within a week, it was at $125,000. Strangers began leaving comments. People who had never set foot in Louisiana, teachers, nurses, former janitors. One woman wrote, "My father died working because he didn't know he had another option. Thank you for doing this." And it didn't stop there. Jasmine's firm created a nonprofit wing overnight dedicated to providing retirement assistance for underpaid school workers in the South. She called the hallways first, a nod to the ones who walked them long before the bell rang. However, none of that compared to what she felt the morning she picked up the phone and called Mr. Trailer. "Hello, Mr. Trailer. It's Jasmine. I have some news." His voice was quiet. "Good news or bad?" She smiled. "You're done working, sir." There was a long pause. "I don't follow. You're retiring today, not next year, not next month. We raised the money. More than enough. You're going home." He didn't speak right away. She heard a soft exhale like he'd been holding something in for years without realizing. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. "You've said enough just by being who you are." He laughed softly. "I was just trying to keep the floors clean. You did a lot more than that." Moreover, it wasn't just about him anymore. Other schools began reaching out. People started asking questions about wages, about retirement, about the quiet workers who made everything possible but never got a thank you. Jasmine knew this wasn't a fix-all, but it was a start. A loud, visible, undeniable start. However, there was one more thing she had to do, and it meant driving back to Shreveport one final time. The drive back to Shreveport felt different this time. Jasmine wasn't weighed down by the past anymore. She wasn't visiting out of nostalgia or guilt. She was coming with purpose. And in the passenger seat, a folder rested with all the paperwork to transfer Mr. Trailer's GoFundMe balance directly into a secured retirement account. There was even a small fund set aside for travel should he ever want to see something beyond the school walls he'd walked for half his life. When she pulled up to Clara Barton High, 2 local news vans were already parked by the sidewalk. A few teachers stood near the front doors, whispering and pointing. Some students had skipped class to hang around the courtyard, curious about all the attention. Jasmine didn't want a spectacle, but she knew something like this was bigger than Mr. Trailer. It was about every janitor, cafeteria worker, bus driver, and crossing guard who gave everything and got little in return. Mr. Trailer stood waiting near the front steps, wearing a button-down shirt she'd never seen before, clean white cotton sleeves slightly too long. He looked almost nervous. In his hands, he held a folded note. She approached slowly, holding out the envelope. He looked at it, then at her. "What's this?" "Your freedom," she said. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I don't know if I know how to be free." "Then let's figure it out," she replied. They walked inside the school together. The principal had arranged a small assembly, nothing formal, just staff and students in the gymnasium. A few teachers gave short speeches, mostly thanking Mr. Trailer for his years of service. But it was the moment when Jasmine handed him the microphone that everything got quiet. He looked out over the crowd, eyes lingering on a group of students in the front row. Some looked bored, some confused. 1 or 2 actually paid attention. "My name's Leonard Trailer," he said slowly. "Been working here longer than most of you been alive." A few chuckles. "I used to mop these floors when your grandparents came here. I've seen students win scholarships and lose parents. I've seen teachers give everything and walk out with nothing. And I kept coming back because I believed maybe I was helping someone keep going." He paused. His voice didn't shake, but it did soften. "I didn't think anyone ever noticed, but I was wrong. This young woman here," she remembered. He turned slightly toward Jasmine, then back to the crowd. "I'm retiring today, not because I gave up, but because someone finally reminded me that I'd done enough." The gym clapped, some stood. A few students cheered. Jasmine watched as he stepped down and sat beside her, folding his hands calmly. When the story aired that evening, it spread even faster than she expected. Cable news picked it up. National newspapers called it a quiet revolution. Celebrities tweeted about Mr. Trailer. One even matched the fundraiser's total anonymously. However, Jasmine didn't care about the spotlight. She paid attention to the comments, the handwritten letters, the stories people shared. "My mother cleaned schools for 30 years. No one ever thanked her. I cried watching this. My dad was a janitor who worked through cancer. Thank you for showing the world what that kind of sacrifice looks like." An email arrived from a superintendent in Ohio asking for help setting up a similar fund for his district, a principal in Missouri, a teacher in El Paso. One message simply read, "You reminded us that people like him are the reason anything gets done." Jasmine replied to every message she could, but one thing stayed with her, a photo someone sent from a high school in Little Rock. A custodian sitting with 2 kids eating lunch. The caption said, "They started a program here, all thanks to Mr. Trailer." Yet, Jasmine knew this wasn't about going viral. It was about lighting something that would keep burning long after the attention faded. 2 weeks later, Jasmine stood on the front porch of a small 1-story house tucked between a laundromat and a Baptist church on West 71st Street. The neighborhood was quiet that afternoon. No cameras, no crowd, just the sound of birds and the occasional bark from a neighbor's dog. She knocked once. The door opened slowly. Mr. Trailer smiled, wearing an Old Saint sweatshirt and socks that didn't quite match. "I didn't think you'd actually come for dinner," he said. "I told you I would." He stepped aside to let her in. The house smelled like baked chicken and collard greens. A pot simmered quietly on the stove. The living room was small but neat. Family photos filled one shelf. Josie mostly, some black and white. One framed picture of him standing in front of the school with a broom in hand, laminated like a museum artifact. Jasmine took a seat on the couch while he fixed 2 plates. They ate in comfortable silence at the kitchen table. "You missed the school yet?" she asked after a while. He took a bite, then nodded. "Every day. But do you feel rested?" He leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling like he needed to think about it. "I don't know if I know how to rest. I've been going so long. Stopping feels strange, like I'm waiting for something to go wrong." She nodded slowly. "I get that. I'm trying, though. I go out in the mornings, walk down to the corner store, pick up the paper, sit out front, and read it like I've got nothing better to do. It's new." Jasmine smiled. "That's something." He looked at her with a different kind of seriousness. "You didn't have to do what you did." "Yes, I did. You could have forgotten me like the rest." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out a hardcover binder. Inside were printed pages full of emails, donation receipts, notes from the nonprofit. On top, a short letter written in her own handwriting. "I'm not done," she said. "This is bigger than us now. The foundation has already helped 3 other janitors in Louisiana. We've got plans for a pilot program in Mississippi, and I want you to be part of it." He looked at her. "Doing what?" "Whatever you want. Speaking, mentoring, just being present. We'll pay you. You don't have to lift a mop ever again, but you still get to matter." He blinked hard, caught off guard. "I never thought I'd be asked for anything besides my keys and my hours." "Well," she said, "we're asking now." He laughed under his breath. "Lord, you really turned out something." She shrugged, smiling. "I just became what you saw in me." They talked for hours about Josie, about his old war stories, about the kids he used to look after like they were his own. And when she finally stood to leave, he walked her to the door. Before she stepped out, he said, "You know, I used to think being remembered was a kind of luxury, too." "It's not," she said. "It's a right, and we're long overdue in giving it where it belongs." He nodded slowly. Then he added, "If Josie were here, she'd say I'd finally earned a nap." Jasmine laughed. "Then go take one. We'll handle the rest." As she walked back to her car, the sun hung low behind the trees, casting long shadows across the pavement. But they didn't feel heavy. They felt like legacy. That night, she posted one last update on the fundraiser page. It read, "Mr. Leonard Traylor retired this month. After 52 years of service, he no longer has to worry about bills or medical costs. He's being recognized, supported, and finally given the rest he earned decades ago. If you ever wondered whether one act of kindness can change a life, this is your answer. Let's keep building a world where the quiet heroes are never forgotten." The donations didn't stop. More stories poured in. And in Shreveport, an old man got to sleep in the next morning for the first time in a very long time. Without an alarm, without an obligation, just peace. Because sometimes giving someone their dignity back isn't just a good deed, it's justice. And we all have a role in making that justice real. This story is a powerful reminder that heroes often work in the quietest corners. Specifically, it highlights the importance of several key takeaways. First, seeing the invisible is crucial. Many essential workers, like Mr. Traylor, tirelessly contribute to our communities without recognition. Therefore, taking the time to truly see and acknowledge their efforts can profoundly change lives. Second, the power of small actions cannot be overstated. Jasmine's initial observations and Mr. Traylor's consistent small acts of kindness built a foundation of respect and belief that blossomed into something much larger. Furthermore, this narrative underscores the importance of advocacy and justice. This isn't merely a feel-good story. Rather, it's about addressing systemic issues of underpaid labor and lack of benefits for crucial roles. Jasmine's actions move beyond simple charity to create a sustainable solution. Finally, it demonstrates the impact of collective effort. One person's initiative, amplified by a community, can create significant change. Indeed, the widespread support for Mr. Traylor clearly shows that many people are willing to help once they are made aware of a need. If this story moved you, then share it, talk about it, and ask yourself who you might have forgotten. And remember, don't just thank them, act.